A political storm is tearing through the nation. Weeks of protests have swept the streets. Demonstrators are demanding an end to poverty, corruption, and years of failed promises. The movement is being led by Gen Z, and it mirrors similar uprisings seen in Nepal last month. Their demand is clear. President Andry Rajoelina must resign.
If someone had told Madagascar's former president, Andry Rajoelina, that darkness, not politics, not the opposition, would end his rule, he might have laughed. But in the end, it wasn't the generals or the ballot box that brought him down. It was the blackout. Night after night, as cities slipped into darkness, frustration turned into fury. For 3 long weeks, a wave of protests swept across the island, led not by politicians, but by the youth. They called themselves Gen Z Madagascar, and they wanted light, both literally and politically. What began as anger over power cuts became something far bigger, a revolt against corruption, stagnation, and broken promises. When the dust settled, Rajoelina was gone, and from the shadows of the barracks emerged a new name, Colonel Michael Randrianirina, a soldier turned statesman, a man few had heard of before the coup. Now, he's the most powerful figure in Madagascar. But who is Colonel Michael? How did he rise so fast? And what is he doing to reshape a nation still flickering between darkness and hope? Let's find out. For years, Madagascar has lived in the shadows, not from war, but from darkness. Entire neighborhoods would vanish into black nights. No lights, no fans, no running water. Families cooked by candlelight. Children did their homework under the glow of phone screens. The reason? A single name, Jarama, the state-owned company tasked with powering a nation of over 30 million people. But instead of light, Jarama became a symbol of frustration. Every dry season, water levels dropped. Old dams cracked. Rusting turbines slowed to a crawl. And when the power died, so did patience. What began as inconvenience became daily suffering. Hours, sometimes days, without electricity or clean water. Madagascar wasn't just running out of power, it was running out of hope. In Antananarivo, the lights go out like clockwork. Some districts spend half the day in darkness. Others don't even get water anymore, just silence from the taps. Tankers roll through the streets, but there aren't enough. People run with buckets and jerry cans, chasing the trucks for a few liters. When the trucks don't come, they turn to wells, untreated, unsafe, but all they have left. At public pumps, the lines stretch for blocks. Children, mothers, and the elderly wait under the sun, clutching empty containers. When the water finally flows, it's just a trickle, and it's not free. 50 cents for 20 liters, 50 cents for survival. For years, they endured it in silence, afraid of what might happen if they spoke out. But in September 2025, that silence broke. It started with a whisper online. A few brave young voices, tired of darkness and thirst. They called themselves Leo Delestage, fed up with electricity cutoffs, a name born from pain and defiance. Within days, the movement exploded. Generation Z had taken to the streets, not with weapons, but with fury. And this time, the government couldn't turn the lights off fast enough to stop them. The call for peaceful demonstrations was shared widely on social media, attracting thousands of people to protest peacefully against the daily outages in Antananarivo, the capital of Madagascar, and several other regions, and reclaim their fundamental right to water and electricity. But as protests often turn, it took a violent turn with disorderly behavior and late-night unrest, leaving several injured and at least 5 dead, including 2 children. But then, it got worse. The government responded not with dialogue, but with force. Security units poured into the streets, their boots echoing through the capital. Tear gas filled the air. The smell of smoke and fear became part of the city's rhythm. What began as peaceful chants turned into chaos. Dozens were arrested. Influencers and journalists were dragged from the crowd. Videos of beatings and detentions began circulating online until they too were silenced. Yet, even in the fear, voices kept rising. Doctors, teachers, engineers, people who had stayed silent for years, finally spoke out. They flooded social media with messages of solidarity and rage. One post went viral. It read, "I am part of Madagascar's Gen Z. We worked hard to find jobs, only to have 20% of our salary taken. We pay taxes, we pay for electricity and water, but we only get 3 hours of power a day. We stand in line for hours just to fill one yellow container of water. "We are not safe in our own country." That post wasn't just a complaint, it was a declaration, a mirror reflecting the anger of a generation that refused to live in darkness any longer. It began on September 25th, 2025, just another protest in the capital. But within days, it became something much bigger, a movement, a storm that refused to die. For 3 relentless weeks, the streets of Madagascar pulsed with fury. By day, chants filled the air. By night, candlelights flickered across neighborhoods. What started as anger over power and water evolved into something deeper, a cry for change, a demand for dignity. And soon, that cry had one clear message: Rajoelina must go. Cornered by the unrest, President Andry Rajoelina tried to calm the nation. He dissolved his government. He promised a new beginning, a new prime minister. But his choice only made things worse: a military general. To the youth, it was proof that nothing had changed, that the same system was returning, just wearing a new uniform. The message was clear. Madagascar's young generation no longer feared the old order. They were done waiting for the lights to come back on. Then came the turning point. The protests had reached their peak, the largest since that first spark on September 25th. Once again, the government answered with force. Police units filled the streets, shields gleaming under the sun, tear gas clouding the air. But this time, something changed. Out of the haze came CAPSAT, the elite military unit once loyal to the very man now clinging to power. Ironically, it was CAPSAT that had helped bring Andry Rajoelina to office back in 2009. But 16 years later, the soldiers who had built his empire came to dismantle it. They didn't march against the people, they stood with them. Suddenly, the battle lines shifted. It was no longer protesters versus police. It was the people and the army, united against the president's forces. The confrontation was brief. The police scattered. The government's power crumbled, not with a gunshot, but with a choice made by the very soldiers who once defended it. And in that moment, Rajoelina's fate was sealed. When the army switched sides, Andry Rajoelina's empire collapsed overnight. In a desperate statement, he called it an illegal coup attempt, but his words carried no weight. By the time dawn broke, he was gone, vanished to an unknown location. The next day, Parliament made it official. They voted to impeach him, not for corruption or scandal, but for abandoning his post. Madagascar's power had changed hands. At the center of it all stood one man, Colonel Michael Randrianirina, the leader of CAPSAT. The same unit that had once built a president was now installing a new one. Before a packed audience at the swearing-in ceremony, Colonel Michael spoke with calm conviction. Today marks a historic turning point for our country. With a people full of fervor, driven by the desire for change and a deep love for their homeland, we joyfully open a new chapter in the life of our nation. We will work hand in hand to draft a new constitution and to agree on electoral laws for the organization of elections and referendums. His words echoed across a nation still reeling from weeks of chaos. For many, it sounded like hope. For others, a familiar promise in a new uniform. The swearing-in ceremony marked a moment the world couldn't ignore. In the front rows sat generals in crisp uniforms, politicians in tailored suits, and young protest leaders, the same faces that had once filled the streets with chants of defiance. But what truly caught global attention were the guests. Delegations from the United States, the European Union, Russia, and France all stood side by side, uneasy witnesses to Madagascar's rebirth under military rule. Standing before them, Colonel Michael Randrianirina spoke again, his tone firm, his message clear. We will work hand in hand with all the driving forces of the nation to draft a new constitution and new electoral laws for future elections and referendums. He thanked the youth, the same Gen Z movement that had toppled a president, and promised deep reform. Our mission, he said, is to rebuild. To reform our administrative, social, and political systems from the ground up. It was a promise that sounded both revolutionary and familiar. But words are one thing, action is another. So, how has Colonel Michael fared so far? It's only been a few weeks since the takeover, but his government has already made its first major move, the creation of what he calls Madagascar's refoundation government. Formed after weeks of tense negotiations and behind-the-scenes compromises, this new administration seeks to unite the fractured pillars of the nation: political parties, business elites, and the military. At its head stands Prime Minister Salama Rajoelina, handpicked by Colonel Michael himself. Together, they've promised to rebuild a nation exhausted by corruption, poverty, and blackout politics. But beneath the optimism lies an old question. Is this the dawn of a new Madagascar, or just another cycle of power wearing a new face? Now, this is where things get interesting. Colonel Michael isn't wasting time. In his first national address, he made a promise and a threat. Each member of the government will have at most 2 months to prove their ability to follow the state's policy. Results will be observed, and if there is nothing to observe, they will be replaced. No room for excuses, no room for empty promises. He vowed to deliver real solutions, to end the blackouts, fix the water crisis, and crush corruption from the inside out. It was a statement that told the people exactly what kind of leader he intends to be. Decisive, impatient, unforgiving. And when you look closer, you see a pattern emerging, one that stretches far beyond Madagascar. Because this language, this tone of discipline and accountability, sounds strikingly familiar. It's the same tone we've heard from the military leaders of the Sahel, men like Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, who rose to power with promises of sovereignty, reform, and results. Like them, Colonel Michael is framing his rule around one powerful word: accountability. A word that many African leaders love to say, but few ever live by. In too many nations, politicians stay in office for years, even decades, delivering little more than slogans. They serve themselves, not the people. And that's why progress comes slow. But now, in Madagascar, a new kind of leadership is being tested, one that gives ministers a clock that's already ticking. 2 months. Show results or be replaced. The people have heard promises before. This time, they're waiting to see if the lights will finally come back on. For the first time in years, Madagascar has a leader who seems more interested in results than rhetoric. Colonel Michael isn't just talking about change, he's demanding proof of it. Because the truth is simple: a president can have all the vision in the world, but if the people under him are corrupt, lazy, or unreliable, that vision dies before it ever reaches the people. Michael knows this, and that's why he's rewriting the rules. Every minister must perform or be replaced. Accountability has finally returned to the top of government. And that's not just unusual. In Africa's modern political landscape, it's remarkable. To bring his vision to life, he surrounded himself with both fresh faces and seasoned veterans, people with scars, experience, and unfinished business. Among them is Christine Razanamahassoa, Madagascar's new Minister of Foreign Affairs. She's not new to politics. She once served as Minister of Justice under Rajoelina between 2009 and 2013. She even led the National Assembly twice, before breaking ranks with the man who appointed her. Her fall from grace came when she dared to question the system. In 2023, she publicly called for the suspension of national elections, arguing that the conditions for a calm, credible, and universally accepted election were not met. For that, she was expelled from Rajoelina's party. Now, she's back, but on the other side of power, a symbol of defiance turned diplomat, standing beside a military president who claims to value truth over loyalty. Colonel Michael's new government isn't just a cabinet, it's a statement. Every name he chose sends a message. The old order is gone. One of his boldest picks was Fanirisoa Ernaivo, the new Minister of Justice, a woman who once stood against Rajoelina himself. Back in 2018, she ran against him in the presidential election and paid the price. After threats and political pressure, she fled the country. From exile in France, she continued the fight, using her Facebook page as a weapon. Post after post, she exposed the corruption and abuse of power that had become Rajoelina's trademark. Her courage earned her political asylum, and now it has brought her back home. Next came another powerful name, Hanitra Razafimanantsoa, appointed as Minister of State attached to the presidency, in charge of refoundation. A lawyer, a parliamentarian, and a fierce defender of democracy. Her story runs deep into Madagascar's political history. She was once close to former President Marc Ravalomanana, the same leader overthrown by Rajoelina during the 2009 coup. Now, 16 years later, she sits at the center of a new political revolution, this time one that promises to rebuild what decades of division tore apart. Together, Ernaivo and Razafi Manansoa represent something Madagascar hasn't seen in a long time. A government shaped not just by power, but by those who challenged it. Among the new faces in Colonel Michael's cabinet, one name stands out: Gaskar Fenasoa Mandrindrarivani, the new Minister of Communication and Culture, a journalist, a parliamentarian, and one of the loudest voices behind the October 14th impeachment motion that finally brought down Rajoelina. Now, he stands on the other side of history, not reporting the change, but helping to shape it. Together, these men and women form the backbone of what Colonel Michael calls Madagascar's refoundation government, a coalition of reformers, dissidents, and dreamers, all united by a single demand from the top: results. Every minister has 2 months to deliver, not speeches, not promises, results. And by results, Colonel Michael means something very specific: power and water. Two things every Malagasy citizen has learned to live without. Two things that now define the success or failure of this new regime. To take on that challenge, the president made a daring move. He appointed Andry Rajoelina, a young graduate in astronomy and astrophysics, as Minister of Energy, a scientist, not a politician. Fresh from academia, now tasked with one of the toughest jobs in the country: fixing the nation's crumbling energy grid and rebuilding trust in Jarama, the state-run water and electricity company. The weight on his shoulders is enormous, but in a country where darkness once toppled a president, the stakes could not be higher. For now, the streets of Madagascar are quiet. No more chants, no more clashes, only a tense, expectant silence. The Gen Z movement, once the heartbeat of the revolution, has stepped back, watching, waiting. No one knows yet if they're satisfied with Colonel Michael's new direction. But one thing is certain: they haven't disappeared. Across Antananarivo, in cafes and on campus grounds, young people are talking, analyzing every decision, every promise. They're giving the new government exactly what it asked for: 2 months. 2 months to prove that this time will be different. And if it isn't, they've already shown what they're capable of. They've brought down one president. They can do it again. So now, the world waits with them to see if Madagascar's new era will shine with progress or fade once more into darkness. What's happening in Madagascar isn't an isolated story. It's part of something much bigger, something spreading across an entire continent. From Senegal to Kenya, from Nigeria to Madagascar, a new force is reshaping Africa's politics: its youth. In the past 18 months alone, youth-led movements have risen again and again, demanding something older generations often stopped asking for: accountability. Africa stands at a crossroads. A new generation, Gen Z, is no longer content to wait for change. They want a seat at the table. They want power to mean something. But this wave of awakening isn't limited to Africa. From Nepal to the Philippines, Indonesia to Serbia, the same rhythm echoes: young people taking charge of their futures. Globally, Gen Z makes up 30% of the population, the largest generation on Earth. They've grown up connected, informed, and unafraid. With social media as their megaphone, they can turn a local protest into a global movement overnight. They are diverse, they are united, and they are determined to hold the world's leaders accountable. The bottom line: Gen Z isn't waiting for the future, they're building it. And as Madagascar's story shows, when they decide they've had enough, no government, no system, and no generation can stop them.